Welcome back. This is video 2 of 3 in our seed starting series from Grow Journey. If you're part of our live studio audience, we appreciate you sticking around with us. We're going to learn a lot today as well as our online audience. So right now we're going to be talking to you about getting your seeds from the point of germination all the way to the point where you're going to be transplanting them outdoors. So we kind of gone over in the last video the different seed starting methods we have here. We have the plastic cells, the biodegradable pots, and also the Ladbrokes system. So you've got that stuff figured out. Now you're trying to figure out, I got to fill these, and it seems pretty simple, right? You just go out and get gardening soil and put them in there. Is that right?
No. And see that the way you end up watering trays like this with overhead watering, you will quickly compact that soil into an impenetrable brick, which you could then build things with, but you're not going to grow very many seeds with it. So if you're a beginning gardener, the easiest thing is to just go and get an organic certified seed starting mix. And if you can't find that at your local garden centers, you can order it online. And then I think you have some great recipes for how to make it yourself.
Yeah, we have some really good recipes. So if you're a more advanced gardener, or you just want to kind of get more adventuresome and try to figure some of this stuff out on yourself, we're going to go through the recipes that we have. We found to work really, really well for these different growing methods. When you're using the biodegradable pots or the plastic cells, they have their own mixtures that's going to be different from Ladbrokes soil blocks. So if you're using Ladbrokes mixtures, it's not going to work in here, and vice versa. These mixtures are not going to work in a Ladbrokes, which requires kind of a denser type material which you can make. So now we're going to go through the recipes for you. So for your biodegradable pots or your seed cell starting mixture, what you're going to want to use is 1 part coconut coir, 1 part vermiculite. These are optional here, so 1/8 worm castings, which we really like, or fresh, sweet-smelling compost, which we also love. But with compost, you got to be careful that you're not using something that's anaerobic, so it has a foul or nasty smell. Your nose will tell you whether it's good or not. If it has a sweet smell, it's going to be good. The other optional thing is 1/8 part diatomaceous earth, which helps control fungus gnats potentially. Although when it gets wet, it's not nearly as effective for controlling insects. So as an example of this, that would be 2 cups of coconut coir, 2 cups of vermiculite, 1 cup of worm castings or compost, and 4 tablespoons of diatomaceous earth. So with worm castings or high quality compost, what you're doing is you're adding biology and nutrition to your soil starting mix, but you can also fertilize your seedlings after germination with a liquid fish, squid, or kelp emulsion if you prefer. Ladbrokes soil blocks actually need a different, heavier seed starting mixture than your plastic trays or your biodegradable cells. So with our Ladbrokes, what we like to do is make sure that you have, again, a denser mixture. So the recipe that we use for our 3/4 inch micro blocks, which are the ones we start with, we start our seeds in our micro blocks, the 3/4 inch ones. We start with 4 parts sustainable peat. We found that actually the coconut coir doesn't work as well for our Ladbrokes. 1 part compost. And then we screen those ingredients through a 1/4 inch screen of hardware cloth, so there's no chunks. So the biscuit's really nice and powdered. We mix all those together really well in our bucket or a wheelbarrow, depending on how much you're doing. Add our water just until it kind of has a nice damp texture. You don't want it wet, super wet, or soaking in water. And then you let it sit for 30 minutes. Let all the material soak up that water, and then you start making your blocks with it. Now for our large Ladbrokes, which are 2-inch blocks that you'll block up, you'll put the smaller blocks into your larger blocks once they get a little bit more mature. We use 5 gallons of sustainable peat. We found, again, coconut coir it doesn't quite work, it's a little too crumbly. And 5 gallons of compost. Again, sweet smelling, you can't emphasize that enough. You gotta have good quality compost, otherwise it doesn't work. Or you can use your worm castings. The next ingredient is 3/4 gallons of sand. You can get that pretty much anywhere, any home gardening center type place that have bags of sand they'll sell for you. 3/4 gallon of vermiculite, which is basically kind of a mica type material. And then you screen all that through, you screen your peat and your compost through a 1/4 inch screen. Make sure there's no chunks, so it's all nice and small materials, doesn't get caught up in your blocks. And then you mix that all together and you add your water and you stir it till the material is damp but not wet. Again, let it sit for 30 minutes before you start making it into your actual blocks.
You have your seeds and you have your seed starting mix. And so 2 tricks that will help the process go easier. The first is kind of a must-do. We recommend that you go ahead and mix some moisture into your seed starting mix before you put it into your cells. And the reason for that is that it's really hard to get the soil mixture wet if it's really dry once you put it in the cells. If you're mixing it in a bowl or a tub and it's not mixing easily, you can add a drop of dishwashing detergent to that, and it will make it easier for that to mix together and it won't hurt your seeds. And then the second thing you may want to do is optional. I actually almost never do this unless it's a seed that's difficult to start, and most of your regular garden veggies aren't. But you can soak your seeds first for 6 to 12 hours before you put them in, and that just gives them a little bit of a jump start on already being hydrated and ready to germinate. So that one's optional.
Yeah. And we do that, also sometimes, apparently you don't do it very often. We do it, we're a little impatient sometimes, so we want peas really quickly. So we'll put our peas in the water and put them, let them soak for 12 hours or a little bit more sometimes. Put them in the ground and we get faster germination that way. Like you said, it's totally optional, and you definitely don't want to do that if you have a bunch of seed varieties you're starting. You want to keep track of them. Otherwise, you're going to have all these classes everywhere, and you're going to not be able to keep track of all these things. If they're really small seeds, you definitely don't want to do it with that.
Definitely label them if you soak a lot of different seeds, because afterwards they'll change size a little bit, they'll look different. You'll be wondering what on earth you have.
Yeah, but we definitely do it with certain seeds. Like one of our favorites is Hibiscus saprophylla, which is an edible hibiscus that forms this really nice calyx. So we do it on certain seeds that are a little more unusual, but you don't have to.
Notice that we have both of these sets of seed packs in trays that don't have any holes in the bottom. And the reason for that is when you water these have holes in them and the water can run out the bottom into the tray. And you always want to empty that tray out after about 10 minutes so that your seedlings aren't sitting in water. And then another thing, you're going to want to make sure that you label your seeds when you put them in, because later on you're not going to know if you have a whole tray of tomatoes, what's what, and maybe you wanted to put your cherry tomato near where you like to sit outside so you can sit there and eat it off the vine, or you just don't want to mix up and put something huge in a space where you wanted a small plant. You can use a lot of different things for that. You can cut up old blinds or solo cups, or you can save plastic silverware and write on that.
Popsicle sticks.
Popsicle sticks. If you use a popsicle sticks, I recommend writing on it in pencil, because if your soil stains it, then you'll still be able to read it. If you use Sharpie, I actually like to write it on there and then stick the Sharpie part down into the tray, and then I can just lift it up and read it. And that way the sunlight can't get to it and fade the UV. And Erin actually discovered that the silver Sharpies don't fade in sunlight.
Well, Susan discovered that.
Susan did, okay,
I don't want to take credit for it.
All right.
I'm a tyrant. So Liza just got through mentioning using a Sharpie. Another reason we use a Sharpie too, not just to make our seed labels, but when we're actually making our plant cells. So here's a example of a plastic cell. It's nice and full, not overflowing, not too low. It's about right where you want it. So we use these to make our little divots where we put our seeds. And so you don't just want to start arbitrarily making holes. What you want to actually do is look at the particular seed variety you're growing. So here's an example of one of our seeds from Grow Journey. This is a garden huckleberry, which is one of our absolute favorites for making preserves. It's a really nice nightshade. And this one says 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep. So what I would do is just make a little divot for that. Again, it's pretty shallow. And then you just make your divots nice right in the center of the cell. Then you add your seeds, and you want to make sure to cover those seeds back up. So if the seeds are in there, to cover back up. Put in my plant label, whichever you want to, if you're using popsicle sticks or any number of things that you would potentially want to use. Drop in your labels, or if the whole thing is that one seed variety, you would just put one in, and then you start filling up your trays. And that's how you get started as far as getting everything ready to go on your cells.
So the lab blocks are a little different. You're gonna, like I mentioned earlier, you're gonna start with your little micro blocks, the 3/4 inch blocks. That's the best way to start with them. You can get about 312 or maybe more individual cells into a single seed tray with these guys. And then about 2 weeks after they germinate, you're going to want to pot them up or block them up into a larger 2-inch block, and they fit perfectly in there. So that's how you do your lab system. But what's important too, as you're getting going with your seeds, is just consider that you don't have to plant all your seeds in a single packet the year you get them or the season you get them. So one of the things that really was frustrating to us when we were getting started in gardening is we didn't know how long our seeds lasted, so we had to look them up. But we put that information right on the Grow Journey packets. So at the bottom left of the corner, you'll see seed viability, again with the garden huckleberry, 3 to 5 years, used by 2021. So this year I might only want to use a few of these, and put this back in my seed library, pull it out next year, do a few more the year after that. So that's also something you might want to consider as you're starting seeds, is how long are these seeds going to last, and do I need to plant all these right away?
So getting enough light indoors on your seedlings can be a real challenge for people, especially, it's actually probably one of the top reasons that new gardeners maybe have failure as far as starting seeds. So the reason for that is because if you think about it, your house, you have filtered light's going to be filtered through the windows. So especially if you have a modern house with good energy efficient windows, a lot of those UV rays are going to be blocked out. And your plants need that for optimal growth. So that's why we really recommend, if you don't have a really sunny south-facing window, and if you don't know which way your window is facing, you can use an app or just look at a map or whatever it happens to be. So if it's facing south, you might have enough sunlight coming through to be able to get your plants along. Otherwise, we recommend a grow light setup like this one. It doesn't cost very much. Again, we have the article on our blog at Grow Journey, so you can check that out, see exactly what we use here. And you can get it from anywhere you are in the country. But so anyway, light is an issue for people. So think about your light situation and making sure that you have enough light indoors in order to provide an adequate situation for your plants. Eliza, when you were getting started, you didn't have grow lights, so you want to tell them maybe a little bit more about what you did?
Sure, and it's not ideal, but if you don't have enough bright light and you don't want to invest in grow lights, maybe you only want to do like the 72 tray because you have a small garden and this is enough for you to fit in a small garden. So I used to carry 22 trays in and out of my house every day. But if it was above 55 degrees, I would take them outside, and if it was below, I'd bring them in. And when they're seedlings, they don't need, you'll read on your packet, it says they need 6 to 8 hours of direct sun. When they're really little, really, you just want to make sure they're getting really good bright light. So even if it's only like 4 hours a day, it's okay. But the problem with that is if you have a lot of rain or cold weather or something, it can throw it off.
Yeah, and if you're trying to figure out when to start your seeds, so one of the things that we got kind of irritated by when we were getting started is it was hard to find that information on packets. So we actually have color-coded packets on our Grow Journey. So that if you see the blue, those are going to be cool weather varieties. If you see the orange, that means they're warm weather varieties. And then you just use your quick guides and your grow guides online if you want to see optimal soil temperature conditions for each variety. As I mentioned earlier, things like tomatoes and nightshades and one of your summer plants, they really like good warm temperatures, 85 degrees plus. Whereas your winter plants, things like your kales and your lettuces, or excuse me, not one of your cool weather varieties, those are going to like lower temperatures for optimal conditions. So they'll do perfectly fine in a normal indoor environment and don't really require any amending from a temperature standpoint or putting them in any particular warm spot. So getting into that, we'll just kind of jump right into it. When we're starting off with our temperature, if you don't have a soil mat, but you do have an indoor grow light setup, a lot of times we'll just put our trays. Here's an example right here. So here's a whole rack of tomato seedlings that we're starting. Actually, 312. We're a little bit addicted to tomatoes. Using our live brick blocks, we have it covered up with saran wrap, holds in the humidity while we're getting them started. And so we'll just put these guys right on top of our grow lights.
If you look at the top here, you can see where there's going to be little holes that are vents, and you don't want to put your tray right on top of those vents.
Yeah, so make sure that's important. So these grow lights, they're not super hot, but they provide probably about maybe 80 to 90 degrees. This is perfect for tomatoes. So this is really good for starting off tomatoes. If you were to put your fall or winter varieties on here, it'd probably be too warm and they actually wouldn't germinate, because essentially nature tells a plant when to germinate by temperature and moisture levels. So if, again, if your fall varieties are on there, they're going to say it's too warm. We're going to wait for it to cool down a bit before we get going.
I know that doesn't make sense to you.
We've tried this hundreds of times. We've been through this with you.
Yeah.
So, and we also have an audience online, so we don't need to get this question again. That's not how it works.
No, you can't eat it right away. You have to wait until it's bigger. So how long does it take your seeds to germinate once you put them in the ground? Because that's really the most exciting part, when you first see those little seed leaves pop above the soil. Mm-hmm. And it depends on the variety that you're growing. Some seeds will do it really quick, so you might see something like radishes pop up right away. And then something like parsley or celery might take 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah, so there's actually some really interesting folklore around parsley. You mentioned as one of them. So funny stuff. Back in the good old days, hundreds of years ago, people actually used to think that parsley seeds had to go back and forth to hell, apparently, like seven to 9 times
and then Satan would have to do some magic spell on them before they would germinate. So women were not allowed to plant parsley, or if they did, the husband had to be present. Otherwise, there was some risk there. We know that's not true now. So parsley seeds do not have to go to hell. That's not in our seed starting instructions for parsley. But it is a funny story. It tells you how difficult some of these, or how long it takes for some of these things to get going. With parsley being, I think, sometimes generally about 2 to 3 weeks. So it can feel like, you're waiting a little while if another seed variety's already popped up and you're still waiting on it. It doesn't necessarily mean anything's wrong. You haven't done anything wrong. But give it some time. But do make sure you're not overwatering during this period. You don't want to have your seedling, your seed start sitting in, a big boggy pit of mud.
Sometimes I won't water for even like a week because if there's no seed roots taking that water up, it doesn't disappear that quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just basically the wrung out sponge, again, we're going to keep saying that because it's really important just to remember that. That's roughly the moisture level you want in your seed starts is right around that wrung out sponge level. So
the number 1 and number 2 causes of death in seedlings is too much and too little water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So important stuff to remember, and you don't also want to fertilize during this period. You want, the seeds haven't come out yet, they haven't emerged, they're not taking up nutrition, so you don't want to, before germination, you don't want to add fertilizer to your seed starting mix. Sir Winston Duckbill, you had a question? Okay. No, you don't, after it germinates, you don't eat it immediately. You want to let it go ahead and become a mature plant.
So you got the right temperature and you've been waiting and wondering if anything was even going to happen, and finally something green pops above the surface and you're so excited because finally you've got germinating seeds. And so what you're going to have there is something called a monocot or a dicot, and that sounds complicated, but it's not. A monocot is something with one seed leaf, and the seed leaf is the one that was all curled up inside the seed and it comes out. So a monocot comes out with one seed leaf, and that's going to be like corn and onions. Grass is one, if you've seen that growing in lawns. And then you have dicots, which means 2 seed leaves. So they're going to come up looking like this. And that's like the bean you grew in kindergarten. So peas and tomatoes and there's a lot more dicots actually that you'd be growing as a gardener than monocots. And so once those come up, those are not actually their true seed leaves. And they won't even look like the plants you're going to have later on. You will just kind of sit for a while and you just wait and you're wondering when they're going to put out new leaves. But when they do, those are going to look like the plant's going to look when it's an adult plant. They may be tiny miniature versions, but it'll start to fill out. And at that point, after the true leaves come out, is when you want to fertilize. So even though it's very tempting when they're sitting there with those little seed leaves, you just want to wait, make sure they have enough light, make sure the moisture is the wrung out sponge level, and not feed them yet because they don't have anywhere for that to go yet. And so once they've started putting out those true leaves, they can start taking that up and using the nutrients you give them.
Yeah, and it's important to note too that if you're using a mix that already has compost or worm castings or something of that nature in it, you don't necessarily have to fertilize at this point. So this is more for like the sort of the sterile seed starting mix that you're going to get in a bag. A lot of times they don't have any fertilizer in them. So that's when you would start fertilizing. Like she's saying, whenever after that first true leaves or leaf or leaves have started forming is when you would fertilize. But again, if you already have some fertility in your seed starting mix, you don't necessarily have to fertilize at this point. So if you do need to use a fertilizer, here's a couple things we recommend. So this is just one of them. This is a fish fertilizer. It's fish emulsion. If you're vegetarian or vegan, there's also kelp emulsion. So it's basically the same thing. There's also squid. These are basically an organic fertilizer that you can use. And typically on the back, the instructions are for mature plants. So they're not necessarily for seedlings. So what you're going to want to do there is cut it down you're going to want to dilute it further down with water. So if it says 2 parts fertilizer for 1 part water, you're going to want to dilute that down basically to basically twice that. So just keep that in mind that this is a really concentrated fertilizer, and it can actually burn your plants. So if you think about it like in real world terms that you might be familiar with, if your dog goes outside and pees in the lawn, and all of a sudden a couple of days later you get a nice brown spot on your lawn, it's called fertilizer burn. Same thing can happen with your plants. So you don't want to do that. You want to make sure you're getting enough fertilizer, but not too much, which you can control by watering it down, diluting it a bit. And again, if you already have good stuff in your starting mix that you've added, compost, worm castings, that sort of thing, You don't really have to worry about this right now. So another one that we actually like, that's interesting, is a mycorrhizal fungi. So this is a king of mycorrhizae. There's a lot of
I use one called Great White.
Yeah.
It's got a shark on it.
Yeah, scary stuff. There's most plants, I think 95% of plants in the world actually form mycorrhizal relationships with mushrooms. And so what you're seeing above ground with the mushrooms is basically the fruiting body. What's going on below ground is all these different symbiotic relationships with plants. So the plants are feeding the mushrooms are feeding the plants and protecting the plants. And so this basically just introduces that to the plant. And apparently our ducks really, really like this as well, as you can hear. So king of mycorrhizae, you can add it as a root drench, or you can add a little bit of powder on it as you're going along. But this is good stuff too. So
if you're not sure how often to water to, when he's talking about diluting it, you can dilute it even more. So do 1/4 the package recommendation, and then you can water your seedlings every single time they need water, not just watering them for the heck of it, but if they start to dry out and you water them, just go ahead and do 1/4 strength, and then you don't have to worry about how much do they need, when should I do it, and so on.
And one of our audience members is bringing up a good point too, and that is we'll get into that. Is you basically you can't under fertilize. Excuse me, you can over fertilize. Sorry, I'm getting to it. You can over fertilize, but you can't under fertilize at this point. So you can always add more fertility if you need to your soil. But if you go too much, you can actually end up burning and killing your plants. So just keep that in mind. Be conservative as you're first getting started with the amount of fertilizer you're using.
I think the audience member also wanted you to mention liquid gold.
Well, yeah, you can look that up on if you are interested. Just do a Google search for liquid gold. It's another fertilizer option. It's free, it's readily available in any home in the country. So yeah, you can do that as well.
So you're not growing your plants to be part of the swimsuit catalog, and you don't want them to be leggy. And what that means is they've grown a little bit too much and too energetically because they're trying to figure out where the light is. So if you look at our seedlings here, you can see that you can only put about 2 to 3 fingers between the tops of the plants and where the light is. And that may feel like it's too close to the plant, but you really do need it to be that close. And so you want to watch the growth because they can touch the light and burn themselves. But you just keep moving your chains up as the plants grow so that your light is almost touching the tops of your plants, only like a couple of inches away. And if you don't do that, this is what leggy plants look like. And so you see right here where these are growing a lot, and these got left indoors for a little bit too long when it was icy out. And so they started growing energetically because even though they were sitting in a dark room, they figured somewhere there must be light, and if they just stretch out far enough, they'll find it.
Is this a kale or is it something?
This is a cabbage. And you can see where these have already bent over. They can't support themselves after a while when they do that, and they start to flop over. And it also makes them more tender and more susceptible to diseases like damping off, which is a infection that will rot them close to the base. So they're hard to bring back once they get this big, and so a lot of times you just want to start over when that happens.
Even as microgreens though. So.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Indoor pests and diseases. So this is another thing. Once you get your seeds started, sometimes you might have some issues indoors. So think about it out in your garden. If you have a good biodiverse ecosystem and good healthy soil, there's always other predatory insects and predatory soil microorganisms that can come in and sort of hold any kind of pest in check. That's not so much the case when you're growing indoors. You can get some things that will come in and don't necessarily have predators to deal with them. So we're going to talk to you about 3 common pests and diseases that you can get on indoor seedlings and very easy ways you can solve those problems.
So one of them is aphids. It's probably the most common thing that you would see indoors. And they can come in a lot of different colors. I've seen kind of pale green is really common. I've even seen gray and red and pink and brown. There's a whole lot of different ones, but they're basically just kind of fat. Some of them will have wings, but a lot of them don't. They can actually be born pregnant, so they do all female live birth, and they can just produce at an amazing rate. And so you'll see one aphid, and then you'll see 100 of them the next day. The other thing is that ants, if you have ants in your house, will bring them in and put them on the plants because the aphids secrete a sugary substance that the ants like to milk like a cow.
Yeah, people aren't the only ones that farm, so.
Yeah, ants do it too.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're kind of like fleas for your plants. They suck the juices out of your plants, and they are kind of difficult to deal with when you're doing indoor stuff. When you have them outdoors, not as much, but inside, the ways to deal with them, you can hand squish them, which some people think is kind of gross. You could wear gloves for that. You want to make sure that your gloves are really thin so you can feel your seedling, because if it's a thick glove, you're going to just like macerate your seedling stems, and that's not going to go well either. You can use your sink sprayer at a very low setting. Test it out first on the side of your sink before you spray your plants, because you'll shoot all the soil out of the cell, or you'll bend the stem when you do that. But you can spray the aphids off, and if you have ants especially, they'll probably carry them right back, but it slows down the damage enough that, you know, you can keep it going until you can put them outside. You can use insecticidal soap. You can also, and you want to use the package instructions on that. And you can also get live ladybugs. I mean, you can even order them from Amazon. And, you know, a lot of people have the problem where ladybugs hibernate inside their house in the winter anyway. So every time you see a ladybug in your house, just put it on your seed trays, and they'll take care of those aphids for you really quick.
Mm-hmm. Another common one is called fungus gnats. So these sort of look like little fruit flies. You'll see them, buzzing around right above the soil surface or right around your plants. And the gnats themselves, the mature adult gnats, are not necessarily a problem, but what happens is they lay eggs, and those eggs become larvae, and their larvae actually will eat the roots of your plants. And these are outside everywhere, but again, predatory insects keep them in check, or predatory soil microorganisms keep them in check. So inside, again, you don't have that. So what do you do if you have a fungus gnat infestation? And here's a really good product that we use. It is called Fungus Gnat and Root Knot Exterminator. So basically, it is not a poison, it's actually a biological treatment. It is beneficial nematodes. So these are predatory nematodes.
They're really tiny.
Yeah, so you literally cannot see these with your eyes. You need a microscope. But you put a drench of them on your soil, or on your seed trays in this instance, and all those little nematodes go in, and they end up eating the bad stuff. So you don't. This is also another good thing about this is if you do have root knot nematode, if you're a gardener, you know what that means on your mature plants outdoor in your garden. This is a great product for that too. Just drench your soil with it, and all those good beneficial nematodes are now in your soil, and they're very hungry, and they look for the things that are eating your roots. So great product. We highly recommend this if you have a root knot nematode problem or a fungus gnat infestation in your seedlings.
Damping off is a common problem for people starting their seeds indoors, and that's a disease caused by several different kinds of fungi. And what will happen is you will start to see your seedling wither like a skinny waste that it's getting down near the soil surface, and then it'll flop over like these are starting to do, and it'll dry up like these have done. And what that's doing is definitely killing your seedlings, and it's not a very common problem if you have outdoor seedlings, because the UV light from the sun kills that fungi before it attacks your plants. But when you have them indoors, the light's a little weaker, they're more likely to get it. And a good way to avoid that is to make sure you have really good air circulation on your plants. Maybe even put a fan on in the background if you feel like the air is really still. And then if you are watering, make sure you keep an eye on if there's water sitting in your trays. You never want to leave them sitting in water for more than 10 minutes. So just, take your packs out and pour that water off, and then put the packs back in there, and that will reduce the chance of damping off happening. And then if you can take a tray outside to get direct UV light every once in a while, the UV light actually kills the fungus right on top of the soil.
That's actually another reason we recommend as soon as you get your seeds into their cells or into their soil blocks, get it under UV light. So whether that's under your grow lights, or whether that's potentially even outdoors if the temperature's right, that'll also help too. It'll kind of cook some of that stuff off the soil surface and prevent the moisture and some of the fungi from building up on the soil surface that can end up causing damping off once they get going. So that also helps with your aphids and with your fungus gnats. So if you're putting your seedlings out as often as you can into direct sunlight, you're going to be more likely to have some of the parasitic wasps and some of the other kind of beneficial insects that will come in and knock those things out, or any ladybugs, lacewings. There's a lot of things out there that can help you with some of these pest problems. So getting them outdoors, getting them a nice air circulation, that can help. And mentioning that, you got to be careful if you are taking a seed tray outdoors that has never been exposed to direct sunlight. and you put it right out. You can also actually sunburn your plants, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in our next video. So on that note, we're going to wrap this one up, but we're going to go ahead and tell you to come over to the next video because we have some great advice for you on transplanting your seedlings outdoor once it's time to do that, and you get really good results. We have a lot of tips and tricks over there. So check out our third video. Look forward to seeing you.